Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. I forgot to launch Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Let me just correct that right quick. So I'm starting a little bit later in the evening. I have a eye doctor's appointment tomorrow and my ride was not answering the phone as far as just confirming that we were still on for that appointment. Like normally for a doctor's appointment I would think I could go myself, but I suspect heavily I'm going to have my eyes dilated, whatever that word is, dialyzed, uh, which, yeah, doesn't present for a particularly wise thing to do, is to drive after that. You're not supposed to drive after that. Plus, there is a small chance that they straight up say, "Hey, you've approached the point where you're legally blind, and we're gonna take your driving license, anyways." And yeah, honestly, I might be not too upset about that if they did declare me legally blind. It would really suck if it led to actually being unable to read screens or play video games. That would be a major thing. But if I was just slightly over the limit and then had a good excuse to never drive again, I would be kind of happy to accept that. We're going to scroll down the SteamDB 24-hour peak concurrent player count chart here. Otherwise, what have I been doing over the past weekend? Wouldn't say too much. Playing a little bit of Vampire Survivors, making the last couple of episodes of Vampire Survivors before I'm done, and then really not accomplishing too much in the cleaning and decluttering project of getting my house cleaned and decluttered. Inherently, I was doing well for 2 or 3 weeks, and then I had a downswing, and so now I'm starting to feel fairly tired and exhausted and not capable of just moving furniture and doing things as much, which that's what happens with me, is that I might get a couple of good days, and then usually 24 to 48 hours later I start to get really, really bad, just tired, sick in a sort of way. And so I spent most of the weekend, I think, sleeping, on top of which this whole doctor's appointment and my sleep schedule are totally not really in alignment. But whatever, I may end up just having to lean back on my default emergency move there, which is to drink 5-hour energy drinks, extra strength, which is basically like drinking poison. It's so potent, but it's the only thing that really works for me. I still think we are early in the year, so I don't think there's too much going on with video game news. I did work on some of the stuff that needs to be worked on, as far as making things bigger, getting the formatting a little bit better, but I would say this chart in particular I didn't work on. It still needs work. Same is true for the most wishlisted upcoming Steam games. I also have been, as soon as I started looking at 3D prints, even off of YouTube started suggesting 3D prints to me as suggestions. So yeah, Google and their AdSense tracking cookies and super cookies are all throughout the internet. I found several projects. A big part of it is going to really just come down to how well I can configure this 3D printer to work. Hopefully I can get it to work at all, and just what level of print bed as far as size and what level of quality far as accuracy it can do, because I could imagine that there might be some prints that are simplistic that I could do fairly well, but then some really nice detailed prints might not really print that well. I have looked into the idea of, instead of using filament extrusion 3D printing, using the resin printing. I'm looking into that. Definitely don't think I'd ever get a resin printer. And I don't really want to fall too much into being obsessed about 3D printers. Anyways, but resin printing is just a little too toxic. A little too much to do there. A little too dangerous fumes. Although I do have gloves and I do have safety glasses, and I do have a gas mask for working with toxic fumes. I still wouldn't want to, on a day-to-day basis, work on something like that. If anything, I think I'd want to do a 3D print with a filament extrusion, and then if I liked it, send it off to a print shop to be printed with resin. Which, yeah, I definitely think 3D printing is more about getting quick prototypes than it really is about getting a final product or multiples of final products. In fact, there's a company I know of that you just specifically sell products directly out of that print shop, and so they just handle everything, and you just need to craft a 3D file, which that is also an aspect there, is that I don't expect I will ever manually make a 3D file myself. I found some interesting things you can do with the filament poop. One is called unicorn eggs, where it just prints a white semi-transparent egg around the filament poop, and then the different colors of the filament make it look unicorn-like, different colorful. On color aspects too, I also just don't imagine I will probably want to get a whole bunch of different colors. I'll probably just print everything in black or white or gray. Yeah. Yeah. If you really want a final product, I feel like a lot of 3D prints are almost like a foundation, and that at some point after printing the 3D print, you should do an entire skim coat of like bond filler or clay around it, and then carve out the clay and paint the clay or the filler to get rid of layer lines, which there might be an idea around something like that if you're going for figurines. I don't know. But yeah, there's really just not too many toys and too many thoughts really out there. And for, say, like the 3D prints that are being made right now, where it takes a game and turns it into a book that's multicolored, and I just feel like to do something like that, you probably would just subscribe to the Patreon of that person and get the 3D files, and then hand the 3D files directly over to a print shop that is just more of an expert on that, or a resin printer to print that out for you. And I can't help but wonder if some of these 3D prints are just like really, really expensive when all is said and done. Yeah. And have I been really doing much more than that? Well, I'll say on the comic book realm, somebody decided to scrape the entire database, or they got internal access more than likely to get the entire SQLite database of ComicVine. ComicVine is still probably one of the best places where people go to collaborate and share metadata about comics. Like they put in the issue number and the who is the writer and who is the letterer and who is the cover artist. Things like that. The day the issue was released, the number of pages, things, metadata. Yeah. ComicVine was part of Whiskey Media, the company that originally founded Giant Bomb, and Giant Bomb has basically the exact same kind of wiki database, neither of which are, I think, being really supported much these days. And I think ComicVine in particular has really nobody behind it, or at least no camera facing person behind it, and really only had a couple of people at most in its heyday around it. But in the old days, when you were using Comic Rack to organize your digital comics that you probably got in some weird way, you would use ComicVine Scraper to scrape the database and add the metadata in a nice, somewhat standardized fashion to your comics. It was a big deal, and it really had a lot of people scraping the exact same database for the exact same information, I'm sure. But yeah, Comic Rack basically is abandonware and has now a community edition that is just out there doing its own thing. So I don't know if Comic Rack is really the best way to have comics digitally without going through Comixology or something, some other DRM full service. Speaking of DRM, I heard by default Godot projects don't really have any obfuscation or DRM built into them. There is a plugin/project to work on that, but it does seem to me like it's such a new software that you might have some pause there, and that it might just be a little too easy for anybody to decompile your game and see the exact source code. Although I would point out that without severe levels of encryption in DRM, that's pretty much true for any game, is that you can decompile it into assembly code. Maybe you won't get the comments, maybe you won't get the variable names in more secure things, but it's pretty much impossible to fully secure an application from being decompiled, which is how cheating mostly starts as far as making hacks and mods. But the vast majority of people, I'd say 99.9999% of players, would not be able to do anything or would not try to decompile a game anyways. They would prefer somebody smarter than them to do it. And yeah, you still own the copyright on your game if somebody steals it, but there is always that danger, certainly, if somebody's stealing your project. So you want to do security and obfuscation, and that definitely is something that should be added to Godot, is that there should be an encrypted output. But really, if you don't have a physical hardware encryption, you really don't have too much. Scroll down the December revenue for mobile games. Still playing Pokemon TCG Pocket. Closing up to the point where I'm going to have less and less I can do with that. And still playing Memento Mori. Making a little bit of progress there. I saw more people are complaining about censorship through Brown Dust too. Seems like a lot was censored when it came to Steam, and maybe it's just getting censored all over the place. In every form factor. But that's all I'm really playing, and for a brief moment there I thought, boy, it'd be nice if I had a third game to play, but I don't think I really want to engage with having a third game to play again. I think that way lies a lot of wasted time. Yeah, one of the projects I was working on and didn't get anywhere, specifically because of the encryption, had a whole hardware element to it. It was a small ESP32 type device, and in that you are literally burning an encryption key into a separate part of the circuitry, and that encryption key is then encrypting all of the rest of the code. So it's a very BIOS level encryption. And even at that, I don't know if your code is going to be that safe. I think this one, again, could probably use some tweaks on the visuals. That was the Steam hardware. This too needs some tweaks. Yeah. I'm having a real hard time having store.steampowered/hardware survey be at 100% and look like this without also changing the way that every other Steam page looks. Yep. Still playing Vampire Survivors, have one more adventure to finish, and that won't get me all 143 achievements. Probably have another 3 to 10 hours of gameplay for Vampire Survivors, after which I probably should take a break and schedule some videos and just not play anything for a while. Particularly, we'll see what my eye doctor says. But yeah, I am really not sure how many more videos I have scheduled. There's plenty to do and lots of work to do. So, looking at the Steam front page, which I prefer it to look like that, and then that. That's another page that needs some adjustment. It'll be a long while before we have any major game come out or any major sale happen on the front page. It's interesting. This Living with Sister definitely seems like it might be more of a lewd game. Yeah, it's tagged sexual content, hentai, nudity, cute and mature. And yet it's today's deal. I would have thought today's deal was hand curated, but maybe we've got the beginnings of something different going on, where they are automating it, or where Valve in particular is going to stop stop ignoring the adult loot games. Which, yeah, they have, for the most part, not tried to promote those kinds of games. At least on the front page, people can find them. I did make a couple of changes to see if things would run a little bit smoother when all these tabs are open. Doesn't seem like things are loading quite as fast as I would like them to, though. Yeah, and we started late today, but it kind of doesn't matter when I start. Whenever I start, it does just seem like that is the point where I start to get tired and yawn, and I think a lot of it really just comes down to talking and breathing out, not breathing inward as much. Looks like we don't have any Steam Deck refurbs available at the moment. Yep. I've only so far found one 3D print that I really like for the Steam Deck, and it really is just a dock that puts Joy-Con buttons and makes an arcade control stick attached to it. I think that looks good enough at 120%, so I don't need to really change anything. And then the top Steam games being played. Yeah. The game I guess I would want to play next, if I was just going to pick a random game, it would be Blueprints. And I didn't actually buy that game. If I go through my list of games I already have, there are probably plenty of games to play. Maybe not particularly for the Steam Deck, but to play in general. Inherently, yeah, whatever the eye doctor says, though, might drastically change just what I'm doing with my life. Maybe I'll just stop buying way too many games on my library and figure out something else to do. But yeah, I don't know what that something else really would be. I already listened to too many podcasts and don't struggle to find more podcasts I'm actually interested in. I have no musical talent to even appreciate music, so if it is just listening to things, it would give me an excuse to finish a whole bunch of Lego sets if I can do them with poor eyesight. But Lego's very expensive and on the verge of becoming more expensive because of its new smart brick, which I'm hearing good people excited about that, but also people somewhat not excited about it, thinking that it is too expensive and takes up too much space in sets and requires characters to look differently so that they can be scanned, and it really just gets in the way of kids having imaginations and using their own imaginations, which that's probably the wrong hill to die on, because I imagine kids these days are just less imaginative than kids pre-electronics. Let's go through the Video Games Chronicle articles. Let's see, some of this I have adjusted, so it looks decent. That being said, I still kind of feel like I'd like to adjust some sizes on some of the text. This is at 120%. This is at 100%. We brought it up to 150%. 200%. Yeah. Yeah, let's just bring it up to 200 times. So, Nintendo's president reiterates plans for future movies and animated videos. Don't roll out anime in the future. The Super Mario Galaxy movie and Legend of Zelda movie are coming in 2026 and 2027. Now, when the president of Nintendo of Japan says anime, that's a Japanese person saying anime, so that doesn't inherently mean it's Akira or Ghost in the Shell or Dragon Ball Z levels of anime. It just means animation. And yes, I think it would be very weird to have a mature audience targeted style of anime come out for most of the Nintendo characters. I could see doing it with Metroid, but then Nintendo of Japan doesn't care about Metroid, so that's not likely to go. Anywhere. Nintendo Pictures was previously known as Dynamo Pictures, and they worked on the CG for Yuri on Ice, Aya and the Witch, in Season 2 of Netflix Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex 2045, which is a lot of Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex anime shows. So it doesn't tell me too much. Yeah. It would be shocking, certainly, if there was all of a sudden a more edgelord, older audience being targeted by Nintendo in their movie presentations. Particularly since we know what the first Mario movie was, and it definitely was not a movie that was targeting edgelord older audiences or anime fandom in particular. It was an audience that was designed to be as mainstream as possible, getting a younger generation if they can, and their parents. And it really wouldn't have made too much sense for Mario for it to have been a hardcore show. Yep. And so yeah, I just don't think that's likely to happen. If it was going to happen, it would happen in some very weird way. So I feel like that this entire article is fairly long to basically say nothing. Let's see. Moving on, Persona's 30th anniversary site quietly mentions the next chapter for the series. Atlus's RPG series celebrates 30 years in 2026, with fans anticipating Persona 6. Yep. At 200 times the size, I can read this fairly well with my glasses on. But since I take the glasses off, it doesn't seem like it matters how big the text is. Now let me just do an experiment here. Yeah, there's a level of fuzziness even at the highest of 500 times the magnification that, yes, I can make out the words, but my eyes want to wander. Yeah, I feel like my eyes are just moving around too much. So yeah, it's not just a matter of size that's gonna solve this eyesight issue that I've all of a sudden developed. It's probably some kind of astigmatism issue. Seems like we've got several interviews that are going to bring out several different articles. Nintendo is monitoring high RAM prices and tariff impacts very closely. The president, Shuntaro Furukawa, says he doesn't commit on potential price increases, calling it hypothetical. I could see them trying really hard not to increase the price of at least the Japanese exclusive Switch 2, because they definitely were seeing people pushing back on the price in Japan and not buying it. And if they're not buying Switch 2s, they are effectively not buying any consoles in Japan. If you got the gamers of Japan to break the habit of buying consoles, you're going to crash the game market completely. People will go to PC, or people will stop playing altogether. Yep. There was a site that listed a potential leaked price for the Steam machine, pricing it somewhere around $750 to $999, which is a pretty good guess, but also a very wide range. Somewhat believable though. Of course, RAM prices may change again, and it may be even more expensive. Moving on, Forza's Horizon 5 has reportedly been a big hit on PS5s, passing 5 million sales. It's estimated to have generated Microsoft over $300 million in revenue. The Sims Studio says its values are unchanged, including inclusivity, as EA's Saudi takeover progresses. Development of the next evolution of the series continues, says Maxis. That will be an interesting contradiction, certainly. But people often make this argument as if Saudi Arabia's first goal is just to spread Sharia law and Muslim influence, when the reality of it is Saudi Arabia's first goal is obviously to make money and have financial influence. Yeah. The Sharia law and a lot of the very strict religious rules of countries often are implemented because the countries are incredibly poor, and thus giving control over your wives and daughters to men lets men conveniently ignore how little control they have in the rest of their lives and in their government, and in their finances in particular. But yeah, Saudi Arabia isn't really so much in that direction yet. Yep. So yeah, they're really just looking for money, and with money and influence they can do whatever they want in their own country, and the spread of things will happen slowly. But yeah, it certainly will be an interesting contrast to see just how incredibly more liberal Sims games are compared to Saudi Arabia. But again, that's not really a story. Like, it's not a story until it's a story. Nothing happens until it happens. So why are we talking about it now? A poster for the Division Definitive Edition has reportedly appeared at a Ubisoft event in Japan. The original game was released in 2016. It'll be interesting to see if the Division has a decent enough single player experience that you would really want to play. Or if there would be enough audience to play it in a new release. I'd assume that it probably is more of a case where it would have to be single player stuff. The Stellar Blade Studio Shift Up has gifted all of its staff $3,400, AirPods Max, and an Apple Watch. The studio frequently gives its staff gifts to encourage talent following success. Okay. That's probably a decent bonus for just like a Christmas bonus type thing. Or New Year's bonus type thing. 300 staff. That's nearly $1 million spent. Probably slightly over it with the AirPods and Air Max Apple Watches. I would assume that they are being paid fairly well too. That, on the other hand, for Korean jobs though, they probably are working their butts off 50-60 hours a week. That seems to be the culture of working in Korea. Which, yeah, it's nice to see that they have money to pass around. That being said, we are more interested in really seeing their next steps as far as their next games than hearing articles about them spending money on their employees. Although it is interesting, we don't get these kinds of stories in the West, even if they are happening. Perhaps it's better that they don't actually publish these stories. But yeah. Yep. Ziggs on the chat, he says he's gonna showcase a section of his game at the gaming meetup. Okay. I assume he has talked to the person who runs those meetups and arranged that. That sounds interesting, to say the least. I'll be excited to see how far he's gotten in what is a relatively short amount of time, since the Game Jam version, which was, I imagine, very, very different from what this version will be. Yep. Next story we have from Video Games Chronicle. It wasn't our decision, quote unquote. Baldur's Gate 3 boss explains the lack of a Switch 2 version. Larian suggests a Nintendo Switch 2 port is up to Wizards of the Coast. It probably is. It's probably something that they didn't negotiate for, because when the negotiation started between Larian and Wizards of the Coast, the Switch 2 did not exist. But yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 being on a Nintendo console in general, I imagine, isn't the highest of priorities, since it's more of a Dungeons and Dragons mature game. I wouldn't be surprised if there is just a huge amount of censorship that would have to happen to Baldur's Gate 3 to be on the Switch 2 version. Even if there is a Switch 1 version that is less censored. Larian backtracks on AI for use for Divinity concept art and writing. but says generative AI can help some areas of development. Larian hopes AI can lead to ultimately a higher quality game when used appropriately. Which, yeah, they are definitely trying to say anything possible to get people to stop being pissed at them for using AI generated stuff, and I just don't think there's a way. I think the second you do anything AI, you just have that scarlet letter on you for the rest of your life as a company, and so you either are going to have to live with that or never ever use AI, or at least never get caught using AI. I think never using it is the right move at the moment. The Xbox Developer Direct will feature a secret fourth game. The update here is VGC, Video Game Chronicle, understands the fourth title as a smaller scale original game from an Xbox studio. Yeah, Zig says that the demo he's going to work on is going to have controller support, or he's working on adding controller support and co-op, and it will just likely be boss fights on display. Yep. Okay. Oh, one thing I was thinking about Zig is I don't know if Zig has any business cards. Being a very talented artist, in my opinion, or at least one of the few artists I know, he probably should have just like a business card for himself in general, as well as a business card for his video game company, and a business card possibly specifically for this first game he's making. He does have a little icon representing himself as far as an avatar, that going with that on the business card might be acceptable, although maybe going more professional. And of course on the business card you want to potentially have different emails, if not different phone numbers and different addresses. So this article here from Video Games Chronicle is basically just a correction. But we still don't really know what it is. Alright, that's going to bring us to the Gematsu articles. Dragon Ball Z Kakarot sales have hit topped 10 million. The DLC Diama Adventures Through the Demon Realm Part 2 launches January 15th. These Gematsu articles still need a little tweaking to take up less space on the left and right. Let's see. Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 launches February 18th for PC and in the months ahead for consoles. Okay. I don't think there's a real reason why I want to watch that trailer. This week's Japanese game releases: Animal Crossing, New Horizons, Nintendo Switch 2 Edition, Cassette Boy, and more. I think the text could be a little bit bigger too. Well, let's just ask that question. If I just crank this up to 200 times, that is way too big, but it really is the size of the text I would want normally. Yep. Art says they're gonna figure out what they should bring to hand out to people. Yeah. flyers, business cards, things with QR codes on them that land to a landing page that isn't ever going to change. A domain, a website, something that looks official. If you are going to do QR codes, there's different styles of QR codes. That's not the word they call them. Versions, I think, is what they call them. And the lower the version, the bigger the dots are, the squares are, the faster and easier it is just going to scan. It might mean you need to take up more space. There is a delicate balancing act there. But if you go too high of a version, it's going to have smaller dots which repeat the same information over and over again, which prevents problems if a QR code is damaged. But generally, since you're not putting it on a shipping label, a lower version QR code is what you want. Of course, a lot of the online QR code generators don't let you adjust the versions and will just spit out something that's somewhere in the middle between, I think it's version 1 and version 20, 20 being the smallest squares. Yeah. Zig says pins, pamphlets, cards, etc. I was also debating giving a 3D print with an early code to the game at a discounted price or something. Yeah, you don't want to go too expensive in merch, and one of the big pitfalls of running any business and promoting any business is you end up spending too much money on merch, and most people don't want it or just put it in a drawer and forget about it. I particularly wouldn't be giving away too much until you have like a solid release date where people can actually go and immediately wishlist the game on Steam and have some memory of it and have a good chance of actually buying it. Yeah. I watched an interesting YouTube video on someone who had a really bad launch on Steam where they really didn't do any kind of research and made a simplistic puzzle game that was no different than so many other puzzle games that already existed on Steam. And because it was only a puzzle game, it only had the tag of puzzle, so it could only show up on a puzzle fest competing with much better puzzle games. And so it sold only like 50 copies after I think they spent 2 years making the game. Whereas mostly what you see on YouTube is people talk about their successes, and there is a false reality being projected that everybody succeeds. In contrast to that video, I saw another one where somebody made a somewhat simplistic game but made enough money to sell 2,000 or 3,000 copies, and that was enough to pay off their student loans. But if even in that case, if all the money is going to is paying off your student loans, and you have nothing extra at that point to invest into developing your next game that's going to ideally be even bigger and better, well, you probably are going to run into funding issues at that point. I ran a business, not a video game business, many years ago, and it was a lot of money to just run an advertisement in the newspaper or just try and hand out pamphlets and get people interested at all. And in the end, people just weren't interested. And where I was living in particular, people we're not used to the idea of spending any kind of extra money for anything, and I just did not have the market research, and it just was not a time where you could do things globally on the internet. And just about the time where I might have succeeded, Walmart effectively swooped in and offered similar services, or at least claimed to offer similar services to what I was offering at the time. And so yeah, I managed not to go bankrupt running the company, but I also didn't really make any money doing it or get a lot of business. Which, yeah, I'm probably not the best person to run a business in the first place. Let's see. Where were we? We were moving on to the next thing. So I did make some adjustments here on Steam pages where this image now is oddly at 96% of the vertical width of the page. I don't know why specifically 96 lines up. And so this is now stretched out. What I'm going to do, I've fixed some of the issues of this being not stretched out like this. What I'm going to do, I think, is take this information, this HTML, and just copy and paste it up here after this checkbox. So when I get the buttons done, which I didn't work on enough, it really was a case where I worked on making these pages look good for 2 or 3 hours, and then I just wanted to let my eyes rest. But yeah, right after this, if I take the HTML that makes this box and duplicate it up there, that will be as good as I think it will get as far as making things look. Now I don't know why these images aren't loading. It's just taking a while, I guess. Yeah, Zig says it's his first boots on the ground marketing. I am just excited to see people react and play with what I have so far. I might be able to get Steam approval by the meetup date so they can wishlist. Yeah. If not, I'll direct them to Discord or the website. You might very well do well to play it safe and direct them to Discord, your Discord or website anyways. That way it's something you just have a real tight control of. If you direct them directly to Steam and then for some reason the game leaves Steam or doesn't get approved for Steam, I don't imagine that would happen, but it's possible. You could always redirect them to a website for download there, or some other website like itch.io. I will say the meetups we go to are very wild as far as who is there and why they are there. Sometimes there's not that many people. It seems like more often than not, the ones of the 4 or 5 meetups I've done, there's not that many people. And there always seems like there's 4 or 5 people at least that are only there to really play games that they already played. So I wish the meetups were much bigger and there was just more feedback you would get. Plus, who knows whether anybody's feedback is actually going to be valuable or not. So yeah, there was a guy who brought a skiing game to show off at one of the meetups, and he really only got 4 people, including me, to even play his game, and I don't think that the other 3 people really gave much feedback, and perhaps I gave too much feedback, and then that guy just pretty much disappeared and never like responded to anything. I guess he's still working on his game. But yeah, we just don't really have enough people that show up at the meetup as I think they should be. But yeah, it'll be a good small bit of feedback, and then a Steam demo and a Steam Next Fest ideally would be where you get a lot more feedback before launching. So the question really to look up is, when is the next Steam RPG Fest, or when is the next Steam 2D Game Fest, or Cozy Fest, if you would describe your case. As Zig asks, do I know of any larger meetups? There's things in Dallas. There's PAX, certainly. That's one of the PAXs. Certainly would be a big one to go to. There are a lot of small sections. I don't know of any gamer meetups that are bigger, but I would certainly keep an eye and maybe just search once a month on meetup.com. I certainly would like to see bigger meetups closer to where I live. But yeah, there's just going to be, I think, a wide difference between a standard meetup and going to PAX, and PAX is still going to be relatively small versus getting a demo released during a Next Fest and having people actually play it. Once the Next Fest happens, having press releases ready to go, and trying to get other mainstream video game journalists and YouTubers to play your game or your demo is the next step, where you can get feedback. There is such a thing as getting too much feedback, but I think it's very hard to reach that level of getting too much feedback. But yeah. Let's see. And then Zig says, at least it's a good way to dip his toes in the water, he supposes. Then he asks, do I know any good composers? No, sadly I don't. Kevin MacLeod's open source music is the thing that I know as far as music goes, but I'm definitely not a musician. Your best bet there is, if you want unique audio, is to find somebody who is in a band and composes their own music, and going with something like that, it's probably not going to be super mainstream or super great as far as quality of music, but at least it will stand out and be different. Video game music, though, is fairly different from a band song. So a garage band's music, so that tends not to really work either. Sadly, there really is very little as far as video game composers. You might straight up try some of the biggest names that you can find through credits or through LinkedIn as far as composers. LinkedIn as sucky as a site as that may be, is going to be your good to go direction there, as far as actually trying to hire a good composer. Meanwhile, the websites like Fiverr might get you something, but it probably won't be particularly great. Yeah, I think a lot of game developers end up just using audio packs and music packs that are pre-composed and pre-made from asset stores. That's typically what I hear, and usually they buy far too few songs, and so it's just the same song that repeats over and over again, which can be very annoying. With the exception of Memento Mori on my cell phone, that is the only music that is like original video game music that I actually enjoy. But also that is very much just anime music specific for Memento Mori. And yeah, that is the only music I could really even mention. Most Western games don't even put out soundtracks for their own music. Well, yeah, I'm really the worst person to ask about composers and music, as find somebody, I would suggest, who has a band who you're friends with, who would love to have their music highlighted for a minimal fee or free, and at least you'll get something different there. Otherwise, just asset flip music. Let's see. Zig says he watched one of my Fallout videos and I kept exploding. He had an alarm or something. Do you play games on hard? No, I definitely don't play games on hard, and I don't think Fallout New Vegas even had a hard mode. But I could be wrong about that. But yeah, I would have never chosen hard. More than likely, I vaguely recall, and this is going to be my answer pretty much for any old footage that I make. By the time it airs, it's 6 months potentially after I played it. But I vaguely recall there was one DLC where they had a explosive collar on you, and if you went into the wrong areas for too long, you would explode, or something along that line. So I think it was a gimmick of one of the DLCs of Fallout New Vegas. Definitely the main game doesn't have anything like that. There are slave collars in Fallout 3 that if you had that on you and you tried to run, it would explode too. And there are some guns that make the enemies explode, just for silliness reasons. But I would imagine that was why you saw explosions. But yeah, I definitely don't play games on hard. I want to play games on easy for the most part, if there's an option. In a short cinematic mode, I've got really nothing to prove as far as new games go. So this DLC adds this little element here, which that's not really a big problem, although I could stretch this image to be bigger. It would just scroll, it would move the scroll down lower. Broken lore unfollow. Oh. on here. Yeah. Zig says, yes, it was the color one. Yeah. Yeah. In the Fallout lore, they have slave collars that will explode if somebody presses a button or if you get too far from a perimeter. The Fallout Season 2 TV show shows implants that can control people into the back of the neck that are not too different from that. Yeah. I'm not sure the fandom is going to stick with the Fallout TV show for past Season 2 at this rate. I don't think they really need to figure out what they're going to do with Fallout as a TV show. Let's see, moving on. Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation Chronicles of Echoes has been announced for iOS and Android. I'd assume that this is based off of a anime. And let's see. So I don't recognize this anime, but maybe I do. Yeah, the Hulu show that I've been watching anime, the Wandering Witch one, Stories of Elena, I believe is the subtitle, is wild. Like, the most recent episode I watched is just completely different than the episodes up until the point, because it starts off as this like cozy travel show where it's just this anime girl witch going from country to country and solving little problems, to the point where the latest episode I watched has a child psychopath murderer getting its head chopped off in bloody, brutal form, and I'm just like, is this just like written by different people from episode to episode? There's no connecting storyline or plot, it feels. Yeah. That is probably a bad trailer to have shown, since so much of that really looked like it was just from the anime. Yeah. Zig's on a delay. He says, oh haha, I play games on hard or nightmareless. It's extremely taxing. I enjoy the challenge, and some games are really taxing, like real-time strategies. You have to constantly be working. Yeah. There is a slight demand, certainly streaming-wise, for people playing on harder modes. In that some people enjoy to see you fail over and over again. But as somebody who sees themselves more as a critic first, it doesn't really benefit me to get frustrated playing things on hard mode and dying and having to start over. I'm already doing long plays that shows all of the gameplay footage anyway, so it would be fairly crazy to make series go even longer by grinding it out. And there are plenty of games like Balatro that don't have difficulty levels and are just difficult based on the way they've been designed. I would much prefer to get through a lot more of my backlog of games than get some sense of pride from playing on higher difficulties. And it's very rarely, in my experience, the case that a higher difficulty version of the game does anything other than increase the amount of health an enemy has or the amount of damage you take. There are definitely some pretty difficult games out there that are worth playing in their forms, but yeah, I don't want to make it harder on myself. Life's hard enough already in general to make video games hard. Moving on, Uta no Prince Sama Shining Live for Nintendo Switch launches in 2026 in Japan. And this definitely looks like a young maiden visual novel, if I was to guess. Kinjori. Why is that not on the fall list, I wonder? This game looks like something I'd want on the fall list. I still haven't adjusted the slideshow in any way. That was the next thing I should work on too. Uta no Prince Sama Dolce Vita teaser trailer. I assume this would be a sequel to the previous game. Well, maybe not. It's I guess it is. I'm not gonna bother to watch the trailer though. I don't know why we're seeing games get mentioned here. This is interesting. This came out January 14th, 2026. Well, I guess that's today. For a second there, I was reading that as 2025. Yeah. Ketsu Battler added its Beelzebub from Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising on January 18th. One turn kill. Some kind of card battler. We'll give that a chance. Dreadout Remastered Collection is coming to the Xbox One on January 14th. Pre-order is now available. You can see though that Dreadout Remastered Collection is mixed reviewed right now on Steam. Pathologic 3 is now available for the PS5, PC, Xbox Series version launches January 23rd. That's going to bring us to Gaming on Linux articles. Let's go ahead and see if we can make this bigger. 80% scales nicely. That was 67%. Why 100% doesn't scale, I don't know, but it does tell me I need to work on this. Let's see. The European Commission is gathering feedback on the importance of open source. Definitely seems like the EU is trying to focus more on open source things. In particular, I think, though, it is more of a case of the EU does not want to be beholden to using software that is coming out of either the United States or any other non-European Union country that might cut them off, whether that would be China or Russia or Saudi Arabia or some other country. And yeah, it does seem like EU is going open source for a lot of things, although it will be a slow political transition for it to actually take place, if it ever does take place. And it really probably wouldn't affect games too much, in the sense that video games in particular are already doing fairly well as far as SteamOS goes, and government agencies of the European Union are going to install Bazzite or SteamOS. Let's see, a striking looking number puzzle game, Stip, is more than meets the eye. That's interesting because I'd say this looks incredibly generic. This is one of those single screen Unity puzzle games, which, yeah, may not actually be made in Unity, but they look like that. They have a tendency to feel like there's only one screen and that you're looking at a time. But yeah, by this point in the trailer, it definitely seems like there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. And that's kind of a prime example of what needs to happen in a in the case of a teaser trailer, if you're going to have secrets and surprises. Put Stip on the fault list. Let's see. Satisfactory is finally Steam Deck verified after fixing up some UI issues. Good for it, I guess. You can see Satisfactory is overwhelmingly positive. Though I don't really know if I'd ever want to play it. I feel like it would be a little too grindy at the moment for me to want to play it, maybe in a year or two. Bingo Betty is basically a crazy Balatro-fied version of Bingo. Interesting. Let's look at the Steam page. Okay. So there might very well be a bit more interest in playing this, but Bingo still is just really gambling. Let's see, Goverlay for managing tools like Mango HUD gets a major new release, and it's finally on FlatHub. So it configures things. So it's a configuration tool for other kinds of tools. Useful if you need it. Let's see, Steam begins 2026 by smashing the user's online record again. So I guess there is a level of interest in that more people seem to be playing games in this January time. Or it's just more people are playing games overall. And let's see. Canonical calls for testing their Steam Gaming Snap for ARM Linux. Which, okay. We're beginning to see the beginnings of playing games on ARM chips that were not designed to be run on ARM chips. I definitely feel like, particularly with the RAM shortage, we might see ARM chips become just more desirable. Alright, and let's go through the GameDeveloper.com articles and then we'll take a break. Detroit Become Human tops 15 million in sales. And yeah, well, that fits pretty well. I could see some tweaking visually there. A new gender-focused video game site called Mothership has been announced. The new publication will focus on gender inclusivity and building community. Okay. Former Polygon editor Maddie Mayers and Zoe Hanna have announced this new publication. I suspect it will not go anywhere. It'll probably stick around stubbornly and have more funding than most mainstream video game journal sites, particularly specialist focused sites like this, and it'll stay probably as long as Polygon stayed around. But I imagine very few people are going to read their articles other than to be rage baited, because I can tell you that very quickly these articles are going to become rage baited. Inherently, anything that's not fun focused as far as a video game site has missed the mark. Because yeah, the whole point of a game is that for it to be fun first and foremost, and when you're putting anything above that, you have missed your mark. There have been several projects like this in the past, which sell themselves as one things. Feminist Frequency is a great example of that, and that they might be educational or interesting, and then when they actually start releasing things, they devolve into being either highly inaccurate or just rage baity or just infuriating. What Tropes versus Women's from Feminist Frequency, I believe was the name of the series, sold itself as was something that sounded a lot more interesting than what it actually delivered. And pretty much Polygon has been nothing but rage bait and things people trolled on for years and years. So yeah, it would be very weird if Mothership came out with anything that I ever felt a need to actually report on. But unfortunately, we will see GameDeveloper.com report on what Mothership reports on, I imagine, somewhat frequently. Baby Steps leads the 28th annual IGF Awards nominations. There's a whole list here of nominations, most of them games I don't recognize. There's a report that Warner Brothers Games has eliminated roles at San Francisco studio. The California studio is responsible for mobile titles such as DC Worlds Collide. So that may not be as big of a loss as it would seem. Notice here you have a Hogwarts Legacy picture, a different Harry Potter picture, and then Mortal Kombat, Lego Batman, including Batman and Lego games. And I believe this is Game of Thrones. So they're doubling up on the Harry Potter influence. Yeah, it is probably going to be the case that when Warner Brothers gets acquired, though we are going to see more layoffs after that too. So if Warner Brothers Games survives intact, we'll have to reevaluate at that point, figure out how many, if any, games can actually come out from Warner Bros. And in a funny way, it might just be better to see the Harry Potter license go to a different video game company, or the Batman games be licensed, or even Mortal Kombat being made by a different company might be interesting. Yeah, I don't really think anybody's going to care about Game of Thrones at this point. And then I think we already talked about this. The quote, "It's cancerous. Manor Lord's publisher Hooded Horse wants to avoid Gen AI like the plague." Alright. Well, that's all the news. We'll come back in a few minutes and go through all the new games on Steam, and then I'll be done for today. So I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Weird audio glitching there when the Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel was playing. But yeah, I won't worry too much about that right now. So yeah, we'll go through all the new games on Steam. Same old, until I can get the buttons to actually start working and program them in. Where if I swipe down like this, I'm closing the tab. If I happen to swipe this way, horizontally, then I'm leaving the tab open to theoretically make a YouTube short on it, although I haven't actually done that in several months. So either I dump all the YouTube shorts I've made up until this point, or I'm gonna have to make a bunch and dump a bunch, which is a possibility. I almost want to give this a chance, but you can see it's already negative, and there just seem like there's an annoying level of number damage going on there. Here we have what looks like a tech demo more than a game. Virtual City Playground. Yeah, I'll give it a chance. Yep. This is not in English. You may see more of that happen lately. This is a Russian, probably AI generated game if I was to guess. Yeah. What's funny is the use of AI has, I think, not spread as terribly as it could have, or as it seemed like it was going to originally. A big part of that, I think, is probably because Valve has gone in here and forced games to disclose whether they're using AI or not, and there has just been a significant pushback. This is obviously a lewd game, and the game developers that are complaining probably the most loudly are the quadruple A and the AAA games developers that have used AI, where the low effort asset flip garbage game makers, I don't think, care to even complain that they're disclosing AI. They probably figure they're going to get the same 1,000 units sold either way, which may be good enough for them, or may just still feed into whatever get rich quick scheme they're doing by making asset flip garbage games in the first place. Give that a chance. I do think until probably the second corner, there's not a huge amount of chance that any game worth mentioning is going to come out. And yeah, so I have a lot of hope for 2026 in general. Which I guess if no new games come out, that just also makes it easier on people who can't afford to build a new computer to play new games. We may see, like the rumored Witcher 3 DLC that might come out. You may just see older games getting DLC or remasters or re-releases. We might even see a bit of a resurgence in movies. Might just be a little bit cheaper, a little bit easier to watch a movie. And I don't have too much to say, and I'm yawning here. Like, ideally, I want to just fall asleep at the end of the stream and sleep for 12 hours and be done with it, but I don't know if that's really going to happen. I'm not being particularly generous today, which is probably a good thing. I'm usually way too generous. Gotta put this on fall list. Oh, it's questionable whether this would be translated to English well enough. Live action mystery game. And here we have one that is properly tagged as far as adult content. I'll check that out there. I still haven't really figured that out perfectly either, as far as having a button to actually show the pictures. The only way I can see the pictures is to disabled, then be cautious and re-enable the mature content warning I've added. Yeah, very few games that even look like they have a chance of being decent. And very, very little to say today. I have this feeling like I want to start some new project somewhere, but last thing I want to do is start yet another new project. And that would be pretty dumb. I've got so many ones that I've backburnered, and so many ones I need to get done first. If only there was a matchmaking service out there that matched finishers with starters. But I imagine there is probably just a lot more people that start ideas and very few people that finish it. It almost feels like you would have to pay the finishers to match up with the starters. And before AI potentially was a thing, and vibe coding was potentially a thing, there was a pretty obvious large gap between having an idea for a game or a program and being able to create it. And people just would know that, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to make it myself, so that idea is dead in the water. now anybody with an idea potentially can get close enough that it gets turned into a working prototype. Doesn't mean the idea was ever good in the first place, or that it should have gone that far. Give this a chance, but it's a little too close to a hidden object game. I suppose at some point in the future it may just be the case that every idea can be made, but then the problem is there won't be enough people who actually will care about or want to play that game or play that program. Yeah, even now we are potentially running into a struggle of people not really playing games and instead watching other people play games. So if 10 people on average watch one person play a game, then that is potentially 10 people that aren't actually buying the game, or at least playing it. Which, yeah, that is not the kinds of numbers you really want to go and have. Doesn't feel like too many games are even coming out, too. 12 months to launch. Producers gamble. You say no to that. Yeah. And I think we are done for today. And if my clock is right, we've only been going an hour and a half. It feels like it's been longer than that. It seriously feels like it's only been an hour and 40 minutes. That is crazy. How did we go through so many games so quickly? One of these days I'm potentially going to find out that my macro just broke at some point and it's only showing me 1/10 of all the games that came out on Steam. I suppose that is a possibility of what's really happening here. But I can't really do anything about that. So that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.